I normally speak extempore, but realizing that you're a group of scientists, you're extremely analytical of whatever happens around you, so I thought I'd maybe write it down as well. Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me here today for this event. It's always a pleasure to speak to people who are enthusiastic about what's happening in the world and concerned about what's happening in the world as well. Most often we think of architects as people who just design buildings, but there's a greater need for architects to actually contribute to what's happening around us. Our education gives us the broad base to actually look at the world in a holistic manner. And therefore I chose the title of The Art and Science of Design, because architecture is this blend of art and science. And design is the process of envisioning and planning the creation of objects, interactive systems, buildings, vehicles, and so on. Art is considered an expression of abstract emotion, while science is considered the measurement of our tangible reality. Art is said to be creative based on personal experience, while science is empirical based on observation. The support systems of a career in science far outweighs of the arts, and making it a preferred choice for students. That's why I see a lot more scientists than artists today. My father was an engineer, so back in those days after leaving school, it only seemed logical to follow his in footsteps and join IIT. Fortunately for me, I did not get in. Imagine graduating and then going to America and working hard and getting only 2 weeks leave in a year to come back and see your parents. Unfortunately, BITS Pilani didn't exist to be here in the Goa campus. So instead, I secured admission at JJ College in Bombay, where I realized the world of architecture and design had this wonderful combination of the arts and the sciences, where architecture involves the creation of attractive forms and spaces, using the sciences of engineering to make it viable. During my education, I was influenced by two brilliant designers. Buckminster Fuller, who I'm quite sure you must have heard of, who pioneered the concepts of Dymaxion, tensegrity, geodesic domes, and many others. Over 75 years ago, he published books which are seminal, recognizing Earth's resources as limited and the need to treat it as a living machine, integrated and connected in every way. He challenged the concepts of education and even dropped out of Harvard out of frustration with the dated methods of teaching. He saw the world differently and understood the basic module of stable structure as a triangle, applying it everywhere from small objects to big maps. He questioned the wasteful expenditure on weaponry and showed how if the world could be made better using those same resources and instead supporting livingry. He mapped resources across the world and showed how efficiency could be created by tapping resources in creating products and ignoring these man-made boundaries that divide us. These powerful thoughts influenced my thinking, and even cyclostyle papers. We didn't have Xerox papers at that time. We cyclostyled these copies to actually start concepts of how do you work with a triangle. Normally as architects, first thing we draw is a square and we start filling it in or cutting it up. And these went on to developing it in various thoughts. This was many years ago for the Goa airport design, using the triangle and then eventually translated into hexagon and subdividing it. This was before the era of aero bridges, where the actual nose of the plane entered the building, and it was a warp slab system. So the departure, from the departure, you walk down a warp slab, entered one side of the aircraft, and the arrival, you actually walk out the other side of the aircraft. So you're always walking down. It's much easier to walk. And they're connected by a central elevator, which also connects up to the aerodrome tower. Antonio Gaudi was another great inspiration. His buildings emerged from the earth in natural forms, where the structural approach of nature was explored in actually highly engineered buildings, almost as works of art. The learnings of both these masters show up in our own work over the 40 years. Nilaya, built 30 years ago, was rated as one of the 100 best small hotels in the world at that time. It captured the multicultural diversity of Goa, using nature and cosmic themes. incorporating craft and recycling building materials. Our projects recall the traditional building systems using arches, vaults, domes, with a minimum amount of concrete, reviving finishing techniques like situ floors, lime-plastered walls, using renewable wood resources like coconut and bamboo. And over the years, trained and mentored over 200 building craftspeople who now work in different places across Goa. The dome, for example, is actually an 11-meter dome just built in plain mud brick, built in 4 days itself, with no concrete at all. A lot of it's recycled materials, as you can see. And every room is theme-based. It's based on, the sun, the moon, earth, and fire. The Kandra University in Hampi is an example of an architecture responding to the style and form of construction in this historic area. It has the gopurams as visually anchoring structures, but also functional as wind towers that capture air at a high level beyond the radiant heat and hydrate it, thus cooling it through evaporative means, and allowing the cool air to enter this library building, dropping the temperature by about 8 degrees. Yeah. It has a central traditional water body tank courtyard from where the heated air escapes, and deep corridors that shade the main building from the harsh sunlight of the area. The structurals, the building is constructed with over 90% of it as local stone, recalling these traditional methods of building, where even the columns are about solid granite, about 6 meters tall. The cathedral in Karwar challenged the typical approach to a religious building by moving away from a symmetrical entrance and responding to the side road which really accessed the property. Its roof is supported by columns in a tree-like structural system that floated above the screen walls. The building is stepped to enable its occupants to look at the central altar from a distance, and the area below the raised platforms are underground air tanks to even cool the building. Every work of architecture is a challenge. For the Taj Fisherman's Cove in Mahabalipuram, a 65-room extension, it's situated on a narrow plot in a CRZ area. So we twisted the building and even got Tata Blue Scope to make trapezoidal roofing sheets to respond to its curvature. Architecture is all about adding a twist and pushing the boundaries a little. The Taj Bandhavgarh Jungle Lodge responds to the local building materials of brick and mud plaster, but with technology tweaks of double walls and integrated heating and cooling systems. It is built with the local men of the village, and the women worked on the architectural decoration and also incorporating the arts and craft in its interiors and finishings. The Sarai Lodge did a similar thing in Bandipur and also integrated village construction techniques of stone and thatch roofs to root the architecture of the area. Our lodges don't just respond to the materials and craftsmanship in the area, but also look at passive technologies in heating and cooling the buildings. Some lodges, like the one in Tadoba, have a different approach, where we use recycled prefab panels to create a building that is lightweight and sits 12 feet above the ground, using fallen jungle wood and recycled thin planks for its finishing. Being lightweight is an approach that Fuller also spoke about determining the efficiency of buildings. Hence, in this office building, we worked on a hollow column, hollow beam, it's in Noida, hollow column, hollow beam structural system, which actually ran the services right through the structural members. Most often, structural services actually run cladded to structural members, creating a messy situation. Even the air conditioning system was a high-velocity system, much like the ones used in vehicles, giving cool air at its needed points. The building is in steel, completely modular, with stone slabs mounted on neoprene pads. This allows for change over time and even complete dismantling of the building. And if one sells it after dismantling, one could possibly get more than the cost of building it, constant rise in construction prices, whereas most buildings actually are demolished and all its value is just landfill. We incorporated passive cooling systems of green walls, underground tanks, and solar stacks. For the thin wall cladding in places, we had the choice of using a natural stone or a vitrified tile. Natural stone seemed the most sensible choice from a perspective of embodied energy. But when we visited the quarries, we found the tremendous water and air pollution, and more than that, the human rights violations, where workers were almost treated like bonded laborers, trying to repay the loans they had taken. Whereas a vitrified tile, even though it had a high embodied energy, used material efficiently, it handled pollution effectively, and gave workers a fair wage. So when you talk about sustainability, it's understanding individual situations and responding to them in a sensible manner. This is Antilla. I think we all have seen this building. It's a fancy 26-story building housing 5 people, I think 4 now. It has a platinum LEED rating for its efficiency. Design sustainability is not just about materials and energy, but also about how much we use of it per capita. And if we are really concerned about lowering our carbon footprints, we should also be looking at lowering our physical footprints too. Thus, we're working on a small 50 square meter, 2-bedroom house, which is completely off the grid, self-sufficient in water, energy, and partly food as well. It has a built-in flexibility and quick to build. Efficiency is also about the speed of construction and flexibility. The water has an approach envisioned to be closed loop, cleaning its waste, much like in ships and space stations. Its freshwater and wastewater tanks actually act as the foundations of the main building. In fact, Fuller in his designs had worked on shower systems for submarines here. And you could shower in half a glass of water using a high pressure jet in an enclosure where it didn't really need any water drainage point. It was high pressure, so you didn't need soap as well. You just run it over your skin, and eventually the evaporated air would be sucked back into the system and taken on. So we have technologies today that we can actually use effectively in areas where resources like water and energy are in short supply. This book on sustainability opens one's mind to the various complex issues of sustainability of money, cultures, value systems, community engagement, and challenges of the future. A must-read for any designer concerned about these. We had an opportunity to work on the Sustainability Center at a large scale, having been shortlisted to design the Sustainability Center for the Pune municipality about 20 years ago. It gave us a chance to really understand the issue of materials, technologies, and systems, to deliberate on it and provide possible solutions. But designing responsibly is also about engaging the end user. In this very small, low-cost house, which is actually just here in Vasco, the clients actually got involved in purchasing the materials, directly engaging the workmen, decorating the house, and adding all the finer details to it. The boys actually sacrificed their scooter handle, the CDs, and their skateboards and everything. So it was a personal experience, and that's extremely rewarding. If you're looking at sustainability, it's also about engagement. It's about how do you get people on board to understand these issues and really work with them. This also brings us to the question of, does architecture need to be permanent? And how light a footprint can we go? This 40-seater beach restaurant for the Taj, we used all natural materials, some of which get renewed every season. It costed about 9 lakhs, and with a profit of about 50,000 every night, it has covered the cost of construction in just under 3 weeks. We suddenly see the viability of an architecture which is really temporary, used only for the purpose that it's meant for. The Japanese are experts in being lightweight, and for these temporary beach rooms, we used wood much in the same way that they do, lifting it off the ground, keeping it as transparent as possible, enabling one to feel its free-floating nature, and adding a Japanese aesthetic of minimalism driven by nature themes and climate seasons of winter, autumn, fall, summer. And the interior detailing also included a haiku describing the season. The world over, people have developed their own approach to architecture, using materials available to them in close proximity with building techniques handed down through the ages. Most have been lightweight, using natural materials, and not even designed by architects. This interesting book catalogs a number of these approaches. In fact, it's only in the last couple of centuries that we have penetrated the biosphere in search of materials, metals, and for heavy construction, and energy materials like oil and coal. This has led to the pollution of our biosphere and a complete reliance on the lithosphere materials, unlike biosphere materials, which get recycled in nature easily. And this delving beyond the surface of the biosphere has really been the major problem, whereas biosphere materials really are able to be renewed, provided we use them judiciously. When people speak about holistic design, it's best defined by a design that responds to the needs of the user by creating a link with the past to research, contemporizing it for the present, and envisioning its change to the future. It's design approach that addresses all aspects from the external to the internal, the spatial experience, and to the tangible objects one uses and feels. This Ayurvedic spa for the Taj emerges from a study of snake temples of Kerala and demonstrates these principles, right from the spatial effect and creating rituals as you move along. Buildings need to be celebrated in the way we live in it and the way we use it. Yeah. So the inside of the building is also lit with diyas, which is ritualized and it's used, and so is the outside. In design, we research, we look at where we can draw inspiration from, in this case, the temples of South India. What are the themes we could use of earth, air, fire, water, creating spaces that capture that spirit, and detailing it out in every way in terms of the artifacts, the menu cards, and the furniture that is developed for it. Most often as architects and designers, we tend to serve an elite clientele, designing high-end homes, hotels, and institutions. But it's this inspiring book of Design for the Real World by Victor Papanek, which really defines the true needs of people, catering, in this case, it influenced us to actually create a moving school, catering to construct the children of construction workers who constantly get moved from site to site every few months or so. So here the actual school moves with construction workers and the teacher moves with the school and imparts their knowledge. It also brings dignity. In this case, designing a trike, which is electrically assisted for Lamani women who normally carry recycled materials across in heavy bags. So this is sponsored by an NGO, which actually allows them to carry these loads in dignity, cycling around with electrical assist. It's about imparting knowledge and educating them. In this case, teaching kids about composting and how it could be done in a fun manner. You can actually turn the composter around and it composts even faster. Or look at how we can work with industry. Our office actually designs, if you have an IFE machine, our office has probably designed that machine as our product design wing is. So we worked with IFE to actually look at how their cartons could be used effectively, because normally they're thrown. We unpack your machine, the carton is thrown away. And here you can actually reuse your carton as seating. So even the cushioning of the machine, it actually has these inbuilt cushions at very little extra cost. As a design firm, we felt we could do much more than the typical architectural and product design projects we work on. And so we established the COCOM Design Trust to bring design in the public domain and for greater good. One of the areas we felt needed to be addressed was the social sector, where we believed that good design could actually solve a number of problems. design which involves social problems are called wicked problems. And they're problems which are influenced by cultural diversity, social, social differences. And these are really interesting problems to solve because we really involve the public and understand the ground realities. So we looked at 7 different arenas in which we can actually solve these problems in terms of learning spaces, resilience, environment. So this we held as a workshop, which is where we addressed these 7 issues a few years ago. We worked with and partnered with Justice Adda, which is an organization dedicated to bring greater understanding and accessibility to justice systems to the common man. We identified 3 typologies, which is the police station, secretariat, and the High Court, as areas where we could make a difference. So we actually involved the College of Architecture, the Law College, and PhD students from BITS as well, in actually going to these spaces and understanding how we could make them more friendly. Going to a police station or government office or a courtroom is extremely intimidating and unfriendly. But how could we actually soften these as designers through communication, through wayfinding, through means in which you can make people feel acceptable and dignified in this space? If you look at judicial systems, the judge sits on top and you sit down over there. The police station is another frightening experience to go to. Government offices, so bureaucratic with these corridors, multiple corridors all over there. That's why they keep on calling them corridors of power. So how can we actually change it by changing the form of these buildings, the layouts of these buildings to make them more friendly? So these studies were really interesting, came up with some really interesting solutions to them. So design has a great potential to actually bring about changes to the way we use our buildings. As an academic, I also had the chance to work with the Royal Institute of Art on the envisioning of the future of Goa, understanding its assets and ecologies, and seeking ways to find a sensible and sensitive solution to the problems it faces in Goa. So we looked at the various ecologies of Goa, the various areas that we have in terms of the coastal areas, the plateau areas, the field, the forested areas, and how the coastal areas are being oversaturated, the interior areas, the forest areas through mining at that time, and how we could address that in many ways. We also looked at governance systems, and governance systems are usually bounded by these smaller political boundaries, whether it's wards or village panchayats or districts. But really, a geographical boundary system is a watershed. A watershed is where all the water from the area is collected, and there's a single stream. And India, in fact, is a giant watershed. And we subdivide the India. So if we actually look at political and governance boundaries by watersheds, we'll have a far more efficient system of governance in place, where water is the life giver of everything that we have, and looking at that as our boundaries. Every village has an asset. Some villages in Goa, for example, is known for its banana, some villages for its watermelon, some villages for its rice or other products. Being an agrarian society, of course, coastal villages for its beaches and fish and tourism maybe. So every village has an asset and maybe a different asset. But how do you actually network these villages, bring economic development where you're actually trading the assets that you have? And how do you preserve its assets of its coastal areas, its forested areas, its field areas? There are many examples worldwide. For example, in the fields, if you see in Southeast Asia, the concepts of agro-tripping, which is basically bringing tourism, but a live tourism, where you're participating in the actual development of the state through agro-tourism. The experience is far more rewarding. How do you link these biodiverse areas through things that we call chloro rings? We look at these pockets that are slowly, you must have heard recently in Bangalore about that leopard entering an urban area. And it didn't enter the urban area. The urban area entered the leopard's area. So we really need to look at how do we actually preserve and connect these biodiverse spots to continue the biodiversity as a fabric throughout our state. We worked with Pratt Institute on a coastal village in Agonda to study it as a typical case. And as a case in which tourism was just affecting it. This was about 10 years ago. We looked at how tourism was affecting the village, and being a turtle nesting site, extremely sensitive in terms of its development and how it could be brought about. And keeping sustainability at its core. So with sustainability at its core, how do we look at the environmental issues, the social issues, at the same time allowing for economic development of it. And we also looked at smart ways, and unfortunately smart has been misused today in sort of smart cities that we have, but in terms of how we could actually make things specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. So keeping the reality of what actually can be done in a particular time frame was the main goal, and achieving it through a vision. Everything that we need to do for the future is through a vision. And this is a vision that was created by the people mapping it. These were 10-day exercises held over 3 to 4 years with the people in their village intensely, where we stayed on site and actually worked with the people. And thus this gave me a background to actually work on the regional plan for Goa. So about 15 years ago, I was asked by the Goa government to actually, along with Charles Correa, Edgar Ribeiro, to actually work on the regional plan for Goa. And the first thing, as an architect, not a trained planner, was understanding what Goa is all about. And that's really its natural and its built heritage. So we really needed to preserve what we had as a resource in terms of our coastal areas, our fields, our forests and orchards. We decided that we needed to protect them and therefore map them. We mapped all the eco-sensitive areas of Goa as Eco 1 and Eco 2, preserving them as no-go areas. And we mapped also the settlement areas. Where is development taking place so far? And mapped them in terms of its density. And how do we actually connect these all? Connect them to roadways, preserve the certain density so there's no strip development or ribbon development, as they call, which stretches across highways. But in fact, create a development in which you're creating nodes for development, where road and rail meet, rail and water meet, or areas where you have at least 2 networks of transportation to allow for development. We assisted villages in understanding what their village is all about. It's the first time that, besides Kerala, a participative plan for development was created, where we actually created a framework and took the plan to the people saying, what do you want? This is what you have as an asset. Can you map it? And so the people mapped it. They actually mapped, this is the village of Para, which is very close to my village. They mapped all their fields, their forest areas, their water resources, their animal paths, their bird nesting sites. And in fact, in this village, all the large banyan trees of their property. It creates a certain sense of belonging to the place, a certain sense of identity, and that's what is needed. And we also had to make them understand what development is all about. So we created a presentation which actually talked about what development and infrastructure is about, where when we talk about infrastructure and development, we normally think that it's infrastructure is about roads, buildings, factories, but infrastructure is also about where we get our water from, where we get our food from, where we sequester our carbon dioxide, where we get our energy from. And usually as a resource, we need about 4 times the area from these natural resources versus, say, the hard infrastructure, or what we call the gray infrastructure, to support it. So to give this understanding to people, you cannot convert all the land as settlement area and develop everything. You have to have a green space, which is your breathing space, which is your resource space for everything. Goa is an assemblage of some 300 odd panchayats, maybe some 420 or something odd villages. And every village has a completely autonomous nature to it. Every village has usually water bodies, an orchard area, fields, settlement areas, which actually make it completely self-sufficient in its structure. And therefore, we need to work with these villages to make them realize that they're actually independent and capable of not just being dormitory towns to urban areas, but actually economically independent as well. While the regional plan is many years old now, the issues of unsustainable development still persist. And with the people concerned about how to address it, and for that reason, a few of us got together and we created a platform called Act for Goa that actually empowers people to be able to police, complain, and lobby for for development that is appropriate to Goa. So Act for Goa actually has a website and an app where you can actually map. You can go to a place, you Google pin it, you can say, okay, fine, there's a field being filled or some development's happening or something's being cut. And it'll tell you the owner of the field that can pop up. It can pop up your form for complaint or find out if it does have a license. So these empower the people. I'm part of the Goa Foundation, and at Goa Foundation we get constant complaints. Somebody says, somebody's cutting my tree, but you can do something about it. So Act for Goa actually looks at ways in which people can actually take up the action on their own by empowering them with the data and the means to. All development, they say, is market-driven, and the best way of handling it is creation of a circular economy and closed-loop systems. All over the world, people have been addressing it in different ways and coming to a realization that social aspects of health, equality, energy, food, etc., are important, as well as ecological aspects of climate change, land conversion, pollution, etc. And this has led to a concept of a three-dimensional circular economy, otherwise known as a donut economy. And it's very interesting. There's an Oxford professor who actually developed this theory for donut economy, which is a resilient economy in which you're taking both the social aspects and the environmental aspects on board in creating a circular economy. As design chair for NITI University, we are working on a new curriculum that will start redefining the roles of architects in societies, where designing buildings is just one small aspect and creating sustainable communities the bigger goal. For this, we are going to have a curriculum change where its new campus will take students through the whole process of design, from understanding the land and community engagement to actual buildings with all the materials and technologies. Envisioning the future is always exciting, and like scenes from Star Wars, has many possibilities. Though Star Wars seems to be from a parallel universe, it is actually about our present, a fight of good over evil, to sustain a future with all its potential technologies and advances, but always drawing from the imagery and values of the past. We all have a potential in whatever field we are in to envision and design our future. May the force be with you.
Very impressive talk. I would like to know if you would like to comment on the differences between the design of machines, which scientists do most of the time, and design of the structures that you design normally. What are the crucial differences, or if there is any difference?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question exactly.
Design of machines, scientific equipments, and so on. So designing those and the designs that you described, is there any fundamental difference in the approach? The machine should also be designed in a way which is sort of harmonious in some sense or something, have some artistic value, or what is the crucial difference
between a machine and a building?
Building machines, of course, they have a purpose, and here also there is a purpose. So what would be the crucial differences?
Yeah, so I mean, as a firm, Mosaic is a firm that actually designs both buildings and products. So besides the IFP washing machines, we're designing lights and fans for the new range of lights and fans for Crompton Greaves. We designed the front end train of the high-speed trains in some parts of India. The Skybus that you saw in Margao was, the body was designed by us. We've designed bodies for various industrial purposes. And machines, of course, have a certain vocabulary. For example, we look at, say, a vehicle design. We worked on tractor bodies, for example. So what is the expression you want to give? What will actually make people buy a machine? What is the selling point or the USP? Besides, of course, the efficiency of the machine itself, the visual aspect. For example, if you buy a car itself, while you're concerned with the performance and the mileage and the various features it has, you're also concerned about the looks of it. So bring in an aesthetic, bring in an approach of what connects to the people. For example, the same car which is, say, sold in the Gulf usually has a lot more, gold trimmings and silver trimmings to it, whereas the same car, say a Mercedes, sold in Europe itself, it has less trimmings because they require a lot more flash over there. So it's really about even cultural aspects that you actually look at. So in designing a machine, it's not necessarily just the raw mechanical working parts of it. There's also an aesthetic aspect that's needed. Whereas buildings, actually, it's far more complex in a way because you're dealing with so many users. Yeah. In machines, it's usually just a few users. In buildings, it's multiple users. It's not just the owner of the building; it's the people who use it. Say, if it's a university, it's the people the students, the faculty. It's the people who clean the buildings who use it. So how do you respond to these various uses is extremely important. So how do you make something that's fairly universal in a way that stands the test of time as well? Because buildings last a lot longer than even objects or machines. So this needs to last even longer. But there are possibilities of how do you upgrade a building. More and more buildings are getting redundant fast. Technologies are improving quicker and quicker. And therefore, we need buildings which are either flexible or actually designed for a specific time period. Yeah. If that answers the question. Yeah.
If I may, yeah. Thank you so much for a really refreshing talk on aspects that really touch us when we don't really explicitly think about it in a technological
Just a little louder,
institute.
please. Okay.
Yeah, so I was thanking you for your talk, and my question is that in an area like this where you're talking about architecture and design and sustainability, would you look for? I mean, what do you think is the market for education in this space? How many students do you think we could attract if we were to design a program in architecture and design as part of a technology institute? Would you be able to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I studied architecture, there were 20 colleges of architecture across the whole of India. There are now over 600 colleges. And the profession is suffering greatly from this thing. There are not enough academics to actually engage with architecture. And the standards have dropped dramatically. So it's important that how do you actually look at this? It's a challenge which maybe you cannot address immediately. So how do you integrate, say, the way universities abroad do is, can you actually engage your university with the professional world? Yeah? So you actually get part of your training live in an office. And like what we're doing in NITE now is actually making sure that, rather than sit on hypothetical design projects, the students are actually going to be involved in the whole building process. So the more live it is, the quicker they're able to actually grasp the concepts of design and its execution. Sadly, the profession is getting redundant. I think we need to look at architects not just as people who build buildings, but who build communities as well.
So thanks for a very fascinating lecture, and it was very soothing because your voice was so soft and sort of as though everything was happening with ease. But my question is about, you said act for Goa, and I would imagine that some amount of activism is also necessary, right? And I'm thinking of other places like Pune and Hyderabad and places like that, where questions about conservation archaeology really, come up with hurdles, especially of the state. The state becomes a major hurdle, right? Because there's this whole question about development and then destruction of, some indigenously organized old structures and all that. So how much of this, I mean, in your professional journey, how much of this, whatever you have done and however you're thinking of the future, how much of it involves serious activism?
A lot. Yeah, I'm also actually currently the president of the Goa Foundation, which has had a lot of landmark judgments in court, where we've taken on the mining lobby, we've actually got some really nice landmark in terms of forest areas, in terms of sand mining and CRZ areas. And for that, you get a lot of flack and pressure from the government. Though I'm not a street fighter, There are a number of people who are street fighter. We prefer to work, with the law, work with hard data, and actually put it across. And unfortunately, we really have to, at the end of the day, to go to the courts to do that, which is a sad aspect. Uh, the reason I was put on preparing the regional plan was I was the one, along with a number of architects, who actually opposed the previous regional plan, which is the 2011 plan. So we actually had a three-pronged approach. We took the streets, both in Panjim and in Margao. We got 8,000 people, which is a record without having to send buses and give biryani for lunch. We managed to get people to come on the street because we had communication. We actually put out drawings. We put out, this is what's going to happen. We did photo montages to say that this is, say, Baga Hill. It's going to be full of buildings. So you need to stop it now. And people realize that. So it's all about communicating your idea clearly. Besides that, of course, we tried to lobby with the political thing. I even wrote to politicians in the center. And of course, we took to the courts. We had 4 Parsi lawyers who came down and actually represented us in the courts for free. So this three-pronged approach really worked well. So it's not just about activism, but a multi-pronged approach that really worked. And as punishment for blocking and stopping the old regional plan, which is the first time any regional plan has actually been revoked, I was put on to prepare the new regional plan. And I realized that stopping a plan is far easier than trying to make a new one. Yeah.
We say that a city like Pune are not growing, they're swollen beyond a point. What's your insightful thought about how to redeem these things? Are we beyond point of no return, or there is still some hope? That's the first question. The second one is, in such situation, how much of modeling, simulation will work, if at all?
Unfortunately, our cities are at breaking point. Yes, you're right. I mean, look at Delhi's pollution levels today. It's dangerous level. It's almost killing people. All cities all over India are actually facing a great issue. And the problem is urbanism. India is just 30% urban, 70% or 35% urban now, and 65% rural. And we're aiming for a 50-50%. Places like America and some parts of Europe have gone up to a 70-75% urbanization, but they have all the infrastructure to support it. We don't. So I think we need to look at a new model of how we're going to grow. And the answer really lies in supporting tier 3 cities, is keeping and creating density at a much smaller scale. Density is needed, no doubt, because it brings about efficiency of all your resources. So whether you're supplying water, power, your road networks, it's nice to have a certain level of density. But the moment it grows beyond a certain point, it can become destructive. And therefore, to determine what is the correct limit of density of a thing, where you can get all your resources from close by. Most cities, for example, the water is piped from 40-50 kilometers away. The power comes from someplace else. And you're actually depleting those resources from where you're drawing those resources. Food comes from a great distance. So if you talk about sustainability, it is actually long-term unsustainable. There's a very interesting book called The End of Oil. And it talks about the scenario of what if we had no oil? And if we have no oil, we would not be able to support 9/10 of our population. We will be down to 1/10 of our world population. It is oil that actually brings us the capability of transporting materials across great distances, of energy, and bring all the other resources we need for a proper livelihood. So let's look at a scenario where we do not have this horrible resource, polluting resource, damaging resource of oil, which is the big cause of climate change, for example. And how do we actually reduce that? Yes, we can't kill everyone and get down to 1/10 of population, but how do we actually reduce our needs? And that really comes from being local. And that's why when preparing the regional plan, is said, let's be as local as possible. Can we get our food resources? We don't have to get our apples from Himachal. And we've been spoiled with the ability to actually transport things over great distances. So how can we actually get people to change the way they live and really be local in everything they do? Luckily, with the pandemic, the ability to work from home, the ability to communicate a long distance without having to travel has offered us a possible solution. But we should really be tapping that as much as we can.
Thank you, sir, for this nice lecture. I shall be.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. And the beautiful pictures you showed of the buildings you've created, of the spaces that you've created. I had two quick questions. One is, when you're when you're faced with a problem of designing, how do you start? What is your thought process? That is one thing, the architect's mind. And second, in this era of artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular, which is now the computer systems are coming into the domains of artists and musicians, what do you think is the future? I mean, will the systems also be able to design such beautiful uh, spaces? And so, as a discipline, is architecture also worried?
I think AI, as we all know, is a tool. I mean, I studied at a time when the most sophisticated computer, all my calculations were done on a slide rule. If I show it to students today, this is a slide rule, can you calculate it? They can't figure out what it is even. They haven't even heard of it. So computers came in, much afterwards. And I can see the change that computers have actually brought, a detrimental change to the way students think. Because a lot of thinking now happens in the computer. They do not think themselves. Above my drawing board in college, I had a little sign which is think before you ink. I mean, if I used to use a rotring pen to actually draw out everything, there's no way you could erase it on the paper. So you had to have all your thoughts in your mind before you actually put pen to paper, because you couldn't erase that. And that rigor has been lost in today's architecture. It's all about lines, you zoom in, you zoom out. The sense of scale has disappeared. And in a similar manner, AI is actually creating that problem where it's very superficial things. AI is powerful, no doubt, because AI can draw the images, but it draws images from what's available on the net. AI, with time, will progress. It'll actually become far more developed. It doesn't right now look at structural systems, services systems. It's pretty images, quite fascinating to most people, but lacks the depth of its resolution. It will probably develop with time, actually having structural systems inbuilt to it. But I think it's also about the creativity that we actually put into it. While this will create systems that will offer us possible solutions, there will still be leaders needed in actually envisioning what the future is all about. Because AI only takes what exists, processes it, and throws it at us. So we need to create visionaries as designers to be able to actually determine where our future is heading.
Very nice talk. I have a quick question, which is that, these days, very often we are trying to save electricity inside the buildings. So we have sunroof and so on and so forth, allows the light to come in, so we don't need artificial lights. But at the same time, there is air conditioning in the buildings. So there is a sort of opposite poles. While the sunlight comes in, the temperature inside the building goes up, and then we have air conditioning. Overall, I'm not very sure that we are saving on electricity and what's happening to the atmosphere. What are your thoughts on these?
I mean, for centuries, we've lived without air conditioning. I mean, we had passive cooling systems. You look at the buildings, say, for example, in North India with their jali walls or, high evaporative cooling systems. They did it fairly effectively, and they're fairly comfortable buildings. But with the advent of technology, where you have these machines run on electricity, it's made us actually reliant on them completely, and actually prevented us from actually understanding what these passive systems and incorporating them, whereas one easily can. When we designed the Sustainable Building Center for the Pune municipality, we had designed auditoriums which actually had louvers on top. So we're sitting here in bright daylight, and you still need lights on. Whereas that could actually modulate the light and bring it in. It could also take the hot air out. The air conditioning system was an underfloor air conditioning system. So again, you got to air conditioning exactly where your seat was. You didn't have to cool the whole volume of it. So the various means in which you can actually look at passively cooling the system. But because power has been so cheap to us that we don't really bother about it. And people really have a great misunderstanding of what is cheap and expensive. Because nature is actually paying for everything. Everything we use when we call cheap, nature is actually subsidizing it tremendously. And that, if we realize that and actually take the true value of how we're damaging nature, I think then only will we wake up to the reality of our consumption.
Thank you, sir, for this nice lecture. I shall be going back with some idea about my next lectures to introduce some of the subject matters related to symmetry. My query at this stage is that
Hold this mic up, please.
while designing a particular architecture, do the architect considers structures created by animals or simply animal builds or creations created by small creatures and so on?
Yeah, actually, it's called biomimicry, where the animal kingdom has actually understood how structural systems work, and human beings have adapted to that, looking at how they've intertwined natural materials, how they've actually responded in an elegant manner to structural systems, responding to climate at times. And we look at, say, bird nests or a lot of other creatures which rely on, say, some sort of protection. There's a lot to draw from it. And biomimicry is not just about nests as well. It's also about how nature provides its structural systems, its services systems. So in fact, when I took the concept of the triangle across, I looked at road networks across cities and why are they so inefficient? If you look at nature, I mean, traffic is like a flowing, dynamic sort of movement. And if you look at nature, whether you look at our circulatory system, if you look at the venation system in plants, there are no crossroads. It's all about divergence or convergence of movement through a system, through nature. And therefore, if you actually triangulate your road networks, you actually only have roads that converge or diverge, you'll get a far more efficient circulatory system. The distances may be greater, but you do not have stopping. So we actually did a simulation on, if you suppose you have actually a triangular system, which is popularly called in Goa as the Tinto, which is basically a 3-road junction. You don't have to stop. You can actually keep on circulating through a space. You may go a greater distance, but the fact that you're not stopping, you're not wasting the energy of actually stopping and starting again. So that's a response to nature, and understanding that in nature's flow, it's far more elegant, far more efficient. And there's a lot to draw from nature. In Gaudi's work, for example, all the structural systems are based on nature. Those arches that he has drawn over there, he used to hang his models upside down. So all this, the Sagrada Familia, the first building I showed, is a building which is, some of those towers go up about 20 floors, all in stone. And he models it by just hanging the building upside down. He just takes strings, hangs it upside down, and he gets the exact curvature of the arches that are needed, and then inverts it, and that becomes an arch that stands on its edges. So nature really has those responses built in, and if we understand that, we can definitely draw those principles.